making room for all of us. Though the feast is never ending, we will never know the cost. From your hands you made a table with the nails that held you down. By your scars you built redemption, and we will never know the cost. We give thanks around the table of the Lord, where your mercy's pouring freely and your perfect love restores, where your grace is overflowing, it spills out on the floor. There is always more at the table of the Lord, at the table of the Lord. From the grave you rose in power, now forever you will reign, the highest King and humble servants. Come and take your rightful place. Oh, come and take your rightful place. We give thanks around the table of the Lord, where your mercy's pouring freely and your perfect love restores, where your grace is overflowing, it spills out on the floor. There is always more at the table of the Lord, at the table of the We're in awe of who you are. We're in awe of what you've done. We have to worship. We have to worship. 'Cause we're in awe and we belong. We're in awe of it all. We have to worship. We have to worship. We're in awe of who you are. We're in awe of what you've done. We have to worship. We have to worship. We're in awe. We belong. We're in awe of it all. We have to worship. We have to worship. We give thanks around the table of the Lord, where your mercy's pouring freely and your perfect love restores, where your grace is overflowing, it spills out on the floor. There is always more at the table of the Lord, at the table of the
Hello, Dan Yarnell here. It's good to be with you this morning for worship, and it's a great privilege to be speaking something that I think will be a challenge and a encouragement to us as we think about our journey in this period of time that we're living through. The book of Daniel is a very interesting book to me. It's a book of transitions. It's a book where the whole world was changing, and the people of God had to find ways of understanding what that change means and how they're going to adapt to it, what they could hold on to, and what they were willing to give up. And in chapter 3 in Daniel is one of the most fascinating bits for me of this book. And it's the story of three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and what God was doing in them and through them. They had been forcefully removed from Jerusalem and taken captive by the Babylonians, and they now find themselves in Babylon along with Daniel and some others. And they have to work out, how do we live in this place? Quoting from one of the Psalms, how do we sing the song of the Lord in a strange land? So we're going to think a little bit about that chapter, and to do that, I'm just going to take the time to read the chapter with us today. So I'm just going to put it on the screen so you can follow along as well. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you've set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times harder than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What an exciting and amazing story. It's one of those stories that's really riveting, isn't it, as it's told, and you can picture in your mind's eye so much of this story and what was happening. I want to use that story as a framing piece to think, how can we learn from the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and face the things that we face, in some ways our own fiery furnaces, and what is it that God can teach us as we continue to serve him in our day and in our time. Now, it's important to remember that Babylon was, in fact, the greatest city of the ancient world. So this is on the backcloth of this is the best place that it's going to happen. Really, it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So this is the premier palace for this story to be taking place. And in many ways, here is God demonstrating what he's able to do. So I just want to think very briefly with you about 3 things, 3 simple things, to keep it memorable. They all begin with the letter D. They just happen to begin with the letter D. And I think that they can inform our own journey as well. And the first of these is to take note of the devotion that we see going on in this story. Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned between 626 and 539 BC, built up an enormous empire. And in that city, he had all kinds of monuments, and he had a reputation for rebuilding cities. So there was a number of things that he was doing. And in many ways, what he was trying to do, he had taken a number of nations in his empire building and brought them into Babylon. So it was very much a multicultural, melting pot kind of environment. And in that, he was just trying to find a way, how can I bring all of these people together in some way? Similarly, if we fast forward into New Testament times, we can see a similar thing happened with the Greeks and the Romans as well, when the Hellenization took place, and then everybody was under the under the rule of Rome, rather. So here we are in Babylon in this period. And of course, this is an important period because the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. And we pick up in other writings that eventually God brings back people to rebuild the temple. But we haven't got there yet in this history. And in this devotion, there was this desire to unite his kingdom under one religion. It's sort of a one world order kind of imagery here, really. Now, this idol that he's made is, in old money, it's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That's pretty big. And we can begin to see then the demand that he's making, the devotion that he's requiring of all of his subjects. In verse 7 of what we read, it literally translates, as soon as they were hearing all of the musical instruments, they were falling down. So this is an immediate response. This is what this tyrannical leader is looking for. So that's the kind of devotion that he's hoping to see. And of course, that works out well for everyone, except for, in particular, these three young Jewish men who know that there is only one God and they will not serve any idols. So they have a different kind of devotion. And really what we've got here is a power play between the devotion of what was required by Nebuchadnezzar and the devotion of their own faith journey. So one is a tangible presence who's shouting and barking orders at them with lots of force and lots of power, and the other is the God who is more hidden from them, but still nonetheless who they're devoted to. It's interesting, isn't it, that these men's devotion, they say, it's not to an idol. They will not be devoted to an idol. They will only be devoted to God alone. And it indicates the authority that their faith and God has in their life. So there's something powerful here, isn't it? And that just kind of reminds us that there can be really good things that we're devoted to. We can be devoted to our family or our community or our church family. Maybe for some of you, maybe slightly less if you're devoted to your football team, but that could be something as well. But there's also evil devotion as well, devoted to destruction, devoted to death, devoted to power issues where people are just erased from the earth. One remembers just in World War II under Hitler's rule, where the Jews were not only not tolerated, but they were just almost erased from memory. as we think about the Holocaust and all that happened there as well. So good devotion or evil devotion, but here these Jews are clear about who they're going to worship and serve, and clear about who they're not, and they're willing to pay the price. So it's good for us to think about our own devotion and our devotion to Jesus, and what that means in the world we live in. And that means sometimes going it alone, doesn't it? You may be the only Christian in your family, as I was for many years. You may be the only Christian in your neighborhood. And sometimes it is hard to keep going on our own. But it comes back to that being devoted and what we're devoted to. The second thing we see in this passage, which really comes out beginning in verse 8 through verse 18, is about their denial. They know their scripture. They know the great Shema, that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that there is no other gods that they can worship. But that must have been difficult for them, because Jerusalem was in ruins. It looks like their God that they were worshipping, Yahweh, had failed. He had not kept the temple together. And here they were forced into servitude, and it was a very strong and real temptation for them to deny God, because after all, here's a God before them that has all this power and all this wealth and all this prestige, and they've been given privileged positions. I mean, if nothing else, shouldn't they be loyal? But instead, they chose in front of the entire city to say no. That's a big challenge, isn't it, to say no in front of everyone else? And the key to this whole chapter is in verses 17 and 18, where they say and make a statement of their faith and their trust and their belief, and they say, we believe that our God can save us. But then they say this, even if he doesn't, you need to understand we will never bow the knee to you. Isn't that a powerful statement? Even if God chooses not to deliver us, not to save us from the fires, we will still not bow and worship. And it's that kind of devotion that has been influential for literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to faith when they see that kind of authentic devotion from people. There's a great story in the first century about some Christians who had been forced in the winter onto a frozen lake, and they didn't have any really warm clothes on, and they were really shivering and freezing. And they were surrounded by some Roman soldiers who were taunting them and saying, just deny Christ, just give your worship to Caesar, and you can come by the fire, you can have hot food. And then one of the young Christians just thought, I just can't do this anymore. And then, even though he'd been resisting for a long time with all of his friends, he gave in and came back and joined the Roman soldiers. But to their shock and dismay, he was replaced by one of the Roman soldiers who had stripped off all of his armor and had joined the Christians. Because in his mind, if these Christians are willing to sacrifice their whole life, there must be something worth living for here. And he did that. Sadly, that isn't always the case, and one remembers during World War II many of the conflicts that many of the German Christians had as Hitler was rising to power, and their tension between serving the state and serving Christ. It was the pastor Martin Niemöller who has this famous quote where he said, "They came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up. And so he, like many others who didn't understand all that was going on and compromised in many ways, ended up spending some time in prison because he didn't speak up soon enough and didn't help those soon enough. And clearly this is a really important message for us as we're in this world where so many things are rapidly changing, so many stories are being unearthed, the way people have been treating women or people of color, the ways in which we've understand history. Many things are being re-looked at and re-evaluated. And how sad that sometimes we haven't always stood up and spoke in terms of justice for others. Paul writes in Romans 12, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they got that. They had been transformed because their belief was that they were not going to deny their God. And that leads us to the last bit of the story, verses 19 to 30. And this is about the deliverance. And it's important for me to state here that they were not delivered from the fire, but they were delivered in the fire. And I think that perspective is really important, because quite often when we face challenges, when we face difficulties, when we face painful experiences, we want God to deliver us from that pain. And why wouldn't we? But he didn't do that here. Just as he didn't deliver Jesus from going to the cross, just as he didn't deliver many of the Christians from facing persecution, just as he doesn't always deliver us through the trials and tribulations that we face, but he can deliver us within them. And so what do we see here? God spares them and he delivered them. What a great ending of a story. It's a happy ending, isn't it? You see, Nebuchadnezzar was saying in verse 15, what God can save you? What God can save you from this? But Israel's God, Yahweh, says, let me show you. Apparently, one of the hymns that was very popular at this time comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verses 1 and 2. And it says this, "But now this is what the Lord says, He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." And then it goes on to say, the reason is, for I am Yahweh, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. So because they trusted in their God, they trusted in the history of their God and how he delivered people, not always from the situation, but often in the situation. Their experiences, not three of them bound up, but a fourth presence. That the presence of God was with them in the midst of their suffering. Now, this is fascinating to me because it's something that I've been working through and speaking about and thinking about for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, I'm currently working on a book around this, about how how God works in periods of suffering. And these are hard things to answer. How can a good God allow evil? Or why doesn't God answer my prayer? Or how come I'm having to go through all of this? It's not a simple thing to answer. And when we think about some of the terrible atrocities that people go through in wars, in famines, in periods of pandemics, in abuse situations, sometimes often because of their faith, it can be a challenge. Now, there's a miracle here that's taking place in this story, but I believe the miracle's not that they weren't burned, as amazing as that is, but why weren't they burned? Do you think it's because it was demonstrating God's power? Is that the only reason for that? I don't think it's that, really. Do you think it's to demonstrate their faith, that they were going to trust God no matter what? Well, perhaps, but I don't think that's the full answer either. I think it's to demonstrate that there is only one God who can be the recipient of our devotion, and that God is willing to enter into our struggles and our pain and our suffering and our fires and be with us in the midst of those. And often, but not always, often he delivers us from that as well. So God does deliver, but he doesn't always change our circumstances, but he can see us through those circumstances. Now, the truth is that faith is always going to be tested by fire. My faith has been tested by fire on many occasions. I'm sure your faith has as well. And clearly, as we're continuing and hopefully moving towards the end of this period of the pandemic and everything, that somehow we will still trust God in this, and maybe we'll be gathering together soon. But until that time, we still are called to keep trusting the God who we give our devotion to, the God that we love so much that we can deny the other attractions and distractions and false gods around us, and the one who will ultimately deliver us, not just from the circumstances we're in or the painful situations we're in, and he often does that through healing and through transformation, but also as he prepares us for a future as we share life with him. Clearly, there's been more people that have gone through suffering and martyrdom in the 20th century than in all the previous centuries put together. And already in the 21st century, there have been literally tens of thousands of people who have suffered and struggled in their faith. And that may continue to be the case. For us, we need to embrace what we can learn from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And just a reminder that we say yes to God, we say then no to others, other things, other ideologies, other beliefs, other things that can attract us or distract us or pull us away. If we say yes to God, then we're already denying any other claims on our life and our time. And just by gathering together week by week in worship, even if it's online or if it's in person, wherever it is, there's something about demonstrating that as well. But then it's also about trusting that God will deliver us because he keeps his word and says, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. So some things to think about from the book of Daniel, things to remember in our discipleship journey, and just commit ourselves to these daily acts of devotion and denial and trusting in his deliverance. This will strengthen us. This will enable us to serve God well in our generation. So God bless you as you continue to serve him. in the situations that you're in.